The scrapyard stretched for miles under the twin suns of 442b, a graveyard of broken starships and failed dreams. Rust-colored dust swirled between the towering heaps of twisted metal, carried by winds that tasted of ozone and defeat. This was where the galaxy's unwanted technology came to die, and where made his living pulling useful parts from the corpses of once mighty vessels. Wiped sweat from his forehead with a grease-stained sleeve, leaving another dark smear on his already dirty coveralls. The portable scanner in his hand clicked steadily as it detected valuable salvage deeper in the maze of wreckage. He had been working this sector for 3 days, following a promising energy signature that seemed to pulse with life despite being buried under layers of debris. The 28-year-old human had been working salvage for nearly a decade, ever since the Galactic Trade Consortium had blacklisted Earth from most commercial shipping routes. Humans were still considered a developing species by the major galactic powers, barely tolerated and often exploited. The only work available to his kind was in the dangerous, dirty jobs that other species avoided. But had a gift that even the most advanced alien technologies couldn't replicate. He could feel the soul of broken machines, understand their pain, and somehow coax them back to life. His fellow humans called it intuition, but the few aliens who had witnessed his work whispered about it in their native tongues, using words that roughly translated to machine whisperer or ghost speaker. The scanner's clicking intensified as climbed over the twisted remains of what had once been a battle cruiser. The massive ship had been gutted by plasma fire, its hull split open like a cracked egg. Inside the darkened corridors, emergency lighting flickered sporadically, creating dancing shadows that seemed to move with purpose. Pulled out his and adjusted the beam. The energy signature was definitely coming from deeper inside the ship, somewhere near what would have been the engineering section. He checked his oxygen supply and radiation detector before venturing into the wreck. The atmosphere inside was breathable but stale, filled with the metallic taste of recycled air and the ozone smell of burnt electronics. The deeper he went, the more his scanner readings spiked. Whatever was down there was big, and it was still drawing power from somewhere. Had seen enough alien technology to know that most systems shut down completely when a ship was destroyed. For something to still be active after what looked like months in the scrapyard meant it was either incredibly well shielded or incredibly important. The corridor opened into what had once been the ship's main engineering bay. Massive power conduits snaked along the walls like metallic arteries, most of them severed and sparking fitfully. But in the center of the bay, surrounded by a ring of still-functioning force field generators, sat something that made his breath catch in his throat. It was an alien, but unlike any species he had ever seen. The creature was easily 8 feet tall, built like a predator with lean muscle under what appeared to be natural armor plating. Its skin was a deep midnight blue, almost black, with patterns of silver that seemed to shift in the flickering light. 4 arms ended in hands that bore retractable claws, and its elongated skull housed eyes that glowed with an inner fire. But it was the creature's condition that shocked most. The alien was clearly dying. Multiple wounds covered its body, some sealed with what looked like emergency medical foam, others still weeping a silver fluid that might have been blood. One of its 4 arms hung at an impossible angle, clearly broken. Life support equipment was jury-rigged around the creature, keeping it alive but barely functional. The force field flickered and died as approached, its generators finally succumbing to battle damage. The alien's eyes snapped open, fixing on the human with predatory intensity. Found himself staring into pupils that were vertical slits, like a cat's but infinitely more intelligent. The creature tried to rise, managed to prop itself up on one good arm, then collapsed back with a sound that might have been a growl or a sigh. Should have run. Every survival instinct he possessed was screaming at him to get away from something that was clearly a natural-born killer. But his engineer's mind was already cataloging the creature's injuries, calculating what would be needed to stabilize its condition. And something else, something deeper than professional curiosity, was compelling him to stay. The alien spoke, its voice a deep rumble that seemed to resonate from somewhere in its chest. The words were in no language recognized, but the tone was unmistakable. It was asking for help. Slowly approached, keeping his hands visible and his movements non-threatening. The creature watched him with those burning eyes, ready to strike despite its obvious weakness. When the human knelt beside the improvised medical setup, the alien tried to speak again, this time in heavily accented but understandable galactic standard. Human, it growled, the word coming out like an accusation. You should not be here, dangerous. Yeah, well, dangerous is my middle name, replied, studying the medical readings on the alien equipment. Though technically it's actually James. James, if you want to be formal about it. The creature's expression might have been confusion, though it was hard to tell with such an alien face. You joke. In face of death, you joke. It helps me think, said, carefully examining one of the medical devices. And right now I'm thinking you've got maybe 6 hours before your life support gives out completely, less if these power cells fail. The alien was silent for a long moment. When it spoke again, its voice was quieter, more thoughtful. I am called Hunter Prime of the Sector Fleet, and I am already dead. Not while I'm here, you're not, said firmly. He was already formulating a plan, his mind racing through possibilities and solutions. I can jury-rig something to keep you stable, maybe even get you back on your feet. Why? Question was simple but loaded with confusion and suspicion. Your species and mine are enemies, have been for generations. Paused in his examination of the life support systems. Are we? I mean, I've heard of your people, sure. The fierce warriors, honorable hunters, all that. But enemies? I've never met one of you before, so I can't really say we're enemies. Studied the human with newfound interest. You do not know of the border conflicts? The skirmishes between human colony ships and hunting fleets? Nope, said cheerfully, pulling tools from his salvage kit. I'm just a mechanic who fixes broken things, and right now you're the most broken thing in this scrap yard. The alien fell silent, watching as began working on the life support equipment. The human's hands moved with practiced efficiency, bypassing damaged circuits and rerouting power flows. It was clear that he knew what he was doing, even with technology that was completely foreign to him. Your species, said finally, they have a saying, let sleeping dogs lie. Yes. Something like that, replied without looking up from his work, though I've always preferred never leave a man behind, or alien in this case. You risk much for one you do not know. Glanced up at the towering alien. Maybe, but my grandmother always said that you can judge a person by what they do when no one's watching, and right now, no one's watching but you and me. The life support systems hummed back to life as completed his repairs. The alien's breathing immediately became easier, and some color returned to its midnight skin. Attempted to sit up again, this time with more success. Better asked. Much you have bought me time, human, perhaps even life. Paused, seeming to struggle with something. I am in your debt. Don't worry about it, said, but he could tell from the alien's expression that this was a bigger deal than it seemed. What happened to you anyway? Looks like you were in one hell of a fight. His expression darkened. Betrayal. My own fleet mates decided that the old ways were too slow, too honorable for modern warfare. They sought to make alliance with the hegemony to trade our warrior culture for promises of power and territory. Had heard of the hegemony. Most humans had. They were the closest thing the galaxy had to an evil empire, a coalition of species that believed in conquest through overwhelming force and the subjugation of lesser races. Humanity had been on their expansion list for decades. I opposed this alliance, continued, as did others, but we were outnumbered. Those loyal to the old ways were branded traitors and hunted down. I was the last to escape, and even then barely. So they left you to die out here. They believed me already dead. The attack damaged my ship beyond repair, and I was forced to crash land in this graveyard. I managed to set up basic life support, but my injuries, gestured at his broken body. I have been waiting for the end. Was quiet for a moment, processing this information. Then he stood up and began gathering more tools from his kit. Well, you're not dying on my watch. Let me see what I can do about those injuries. You would help me further, even knowing that my people have allied with your enemies. Some of your people, corrected. Sounds like you're one of the good guys, besides the enemy of my enemy and all that. Watched as the human approached with medical supplies salvaged from the wreckage. You are either very brave or very foolish, James. Probably both, admitted. But I've got a reputation to maintain, never met a broken machine I couldn't fix. I am not a machine. Grinned as he began examining the alien's wounds. No, but you're definitely broken. Good thing I'm really, really good at my job. As worked, cleaning and dressing the alien's injuries, found himself reassessing everything he thought he knew about humans. The stories told in battle songs painted them as weak, cowardly creatures who relied on numbers and technology to compensate for their physical limitations. But this human showed no fear, no hesitation in helping a natural predator that could kill him with ease. Your hands, observed as worked on splinting his broken arm. They are gentle but sure, you have done this before. Field medicine comes with the territory when you work salvage, explained. Can't afford to call for help every time someone gets hurt in the middle of nowhere. Plus, my sister's a doctor. Picked up a few things from her before she shipped out to the colonies. Colonies? Yeah, humanity's been spreading out over the past few decades, looking for places where we can build something without the major powers breathing down our necks. Paused in his work. Your people ever think about just finding some empty space and starting over? Might be easier than fighting a civil war. Was quiet for a long moment. The do not run from fights. Not running, strategic repositioning, said with a grin. Completely different thing. Despite everything, found himself making a sound that might have been laughter. You are a strange creature, human. Your species is known throughout the galaxy as stubborn and unpredictable, but I had not heard that you were also amusing. We're full of surprises, agreed. Now hold still while I finish this. You've got some pretty serious internal bleeding that I can't do much about without proper medical facilities. As if summoned by his words, a new sound echoed through the derelict ship. The distant hum of engines, growing steadily closer, and both froze, listening intently. Search pattern, growled. They come to verify my death. Quickly shut off his and activated his scanner's passive mode. The energy readings showed at least 3 ships approaching, their sensor arrays actively scanning the scrapyard. They would find the derelict battlecruiser within minutes. Can you move? Asked quietly. With assistance, perhaps, but I cannot fight, not in this condition. Looked around the engineering bay, his mind racing through possibilities. The ship was too damaged to provide much cover, and the approaching vessels would have sensors capable of detecting life signs. But there might be another option. How do you feel about really stupid plans? Asked. Fixed him with those burning eyes. I am listening. There's a maintenance shaft that leads to the old reactor chamber. If we can get you in there, the radiation shielding should block their sensors. It's not much, but it might buy us some time. And what of you? Was already helping the alien to his feet, supporting his considerable weight despite being less than half his size. I'm going to do what I do best, fix something that's broken. As they made their way toward the maintenance shaft, found himself leaning heavily on the human for support. The strange reversal was not lost on him. Here was a member of a species his people had dismissed as weak, literally carrying him to safety. Said as they reached the shaft entrance, if I do not survive this. You're going to survive, said firmly. Both of us are, but just in case, what do you need me to know? Pulled a data crystal from a pouch on his armor. The alliance between my people and the hegemony, details of their plans, fleet positions, weaknesses, if this information could reach those who still oppose them. Pocketed the crystal without hesitation. Consider it done, now get in there and stay quiet. I'll come back for you when it's safe. As disappeared into the maintenance shaft, took a deep breath and prepared to face whatever was coming. He had no idea if his plan would work, but he had given his word to help the alien. And if there was one thing his grandmother had taught him, it was that a human's word was their bond. The sound of the approaching ships grew louder, and could see lights beginning to probe the wreckage through gaps in the hull. He quickly moved back to the engineering bay and began working on the ship's emergency beacon, his hands flying over the controls as he implemented his desperate plan. If this worked, they might both live to see another day. If it didn't, well, at least he would go down doing what he loved, fixing broken things, no matter how impossible the job seemed. The first searchlight swept through the engineering bay just as finished his work. He raised his hands and put on his best confused expression, hoping that whoever was out there would buy the performance he was about to give. Time to find out just how good human acting really was. The searchlight blazed through the engineering bay like a miniature sun, temporarily blinding as he raised his hands in what he hoped looked like innocent surprise. Heavy footsteps echoed through the corridors of the derelict ship, accompanied by the distinctive whine of charging weapons and the harsh breathing of environmental suits. Human detected, a voice called out in heavily accented galactic standard. The language sounded wrong coming from whatever species was speaking it, as if their vocal cords weren't designed for such soft sounds. Alive and apparently unharmed. Squinted into the light, trying to make out the figures approaching through the twisted wreckage. As his eyes adjusted, he could see they were, a species known throughout the galaxy for their mercenary work and complete lack of moral scruples. They stood nearly 7 feet tall on digitigrade legs, their reptilian features hidden behind the faceplates of advanced combat armor. Plasma rifles were trained on his chest with the casual ease of professional killers. "Well, hello there," said, injecting just the right amount of nervous confusion into his voice. "Boy, am I glad to see you guys. I've been stuck in this wreck for hours trying to salvage something worthwhile." The lead stepped closer, its rifle never wavering. Identification. Slowly reached for his salvage license, moving deliberately to avoid triggering any nervous reflexes. Independent salvage operator, licensed through the Colonial Authority. He held out the battered data pad containing his credentials. "Is there a problem, officers?" Scanned the license with a device mounted on its armor, then spoke in rapid bursts to its companions in their native tongue. Caught only fragments, but the tone suggested they were discussing whether he was worth the trouble of killing. "You have been here long?" the leader asked. "About 6 hours, lied smoothly. Found some promising energy readings deep in this old battlecruiser. Turned out to be nothing but residual charge in some backup batteries. Waste of time, really." Another pushed past the leader, this one bearing the insignia of a tracker. It swept the area with advanced sensors, pausing occasionally to examine readings on its display. Forced himself to breathe normally, hopping his jury-rigged repairs to the ship's emergency beacon were masking any residual life signs from its hiding place. "Detecting elevated energy signatures," the tracker reported. "Recent power draws consistent with medical equipment." His heart hammered in his chest, but he maintained his confused expression. "Medical equipment? In here. Look, I've been all over this section. Nothing but burned-out conduits and scrap metal. Maybe you're picking up interference from my scanner." He held up the device, which was indeed still active and could plausibly explain some energy readings. The leader studied with cold, calculating eyes. "You work this sector often, human?" "When there's worthwhile salvage," replied. "But mostly I stick to the newer wrecks on the perimeter. Better components, less likely to have nasty surprises lurking in the dark." "Surprises like what?" Shrugged. "Automated defense systems, unstable reactors, wild animals looking for shelter. You know, the usual hazards of poking around dead ships." "Why? Are you guys looking for something specific?" They exchanged glances, their alien body language suggesting uncertainty. Finally, the leader stepped closer close enough that he could smell the chemical tang of its breathing apparatus. "We hunt a dangerous fugitive," it said. "Warrior badly wounded. Last sensor contact placed it in this sector." Let genuine surprise color his voice. "Seriously? I thought they were all the way out on the Rim territories. What's one of them doing in a place like this?" "That is not your concern, human. You have seen nothing unusual. No signs of recent activity." Shook his head emphatically. "Nothing like that. Just me and the rust, exactly the way I like it. Those guys are supposed to be pretty dangerous, right? I mean, I wouldn't want to run into one of them out here all alone." The tracker was still scanning, its readings growing more agitated. "Multiple energy spikes detected. Someone has been using power tools and medical equipment in this area within the last few hours." Felt sweat beading on his forehead, but forced himself to look puzzled rather than panicked. "Medical equipment? That doesn't make sense. Unless—" He snapped his fingers as if remembering something. "There was another salvage crew working this section yesterday. Rough-looking bunch, didn't recognize the ship or the company markings. They had someone with them who looked pretty beat up. Maybe they were patching up an injured crew member." The leader's eyes narrowed. "Describe this crew." Had to think fast. The line needed to be believable, but also lead the mercenaries away from the truth. 4 or 5 beings, mixed species. Human captain, I think, but the rest were harder to identify with all the environmental gear. They were working deeper in the ship, toward the reactor section, seemed to know what they were looking for. "And they left. Few hours ago, I'd guess. Packed up real quick when they spotted something on their long-range sensors. Looked nervous about something." Let a note of worry creep into his voice. "You don't think they found your fugitive, do you? Because if there's a wounded warrior running around out there, I need to know about it." The tracker looked up from its sensors. Energy trail leads deeper into the ship, patterns consistent with movement of large, wounded individual. The leader made a decision. Search pattern 7, full spectrum scans. If the target is here, we find it. As the spread out to search the ship, felt a cold knot forming in his stomach. His misdirection had bought them some time, but it wouldn't take long for professional trackers to realize that the energy signatures were too recent and too localized for his story to hold up. "Hey," called out as the mercenaries moved deeper into the ship. "Should I clear out? I mean, if you're hunting something dangerous." "Stay where you are, human," the leader commanded. "Move from this position and we will assume you are hostile." Nodded obediently and settled down on a piece of debris, doing his best to look like a nervous salvage operator who had stumbled into something way over his head. In truth, it wasn't much of an act. He was in way over his head and getting deeper by the minute. The sound of the search echoed through the corridors as they methodically worked their way through the ship. Could hear them ripping apart compartments, following energy trails and life sign readings with professional efficiency. It was only a matter of time before they found the maintenance shaft where was hiding. But had one advantage that the mercenaries didn't know about. He understood this ship's systems better than they did, thanks to his years of salvage work and his intuitive understanding of alien technology. More importantly, he had spent the last few hours jury-rigging those systems in ways that even their advanced sensors might not immediately recognize. The ship's emergency beacon, which he had been working on when they arrived, wasn't just a simple distress signal. Had it to create a cascading feedback loop through the damaged power grid, generating false energy signatures throughout the ship. To external sensors, it would look like there were life forms and active equipment scattered randomly through multiple sections. The plan wasn't perfect, but it might create enough confusion to give a chance to escape, assuming the alien was capable of moving under his own power. Just had to keep the mercenaries distracted long enough for the feedback loop to reach critical mass. "Human," the leader had returned, its expression unreadable behind the armored faceplate. "Your story is inconsistent with our findings." Looked up with what he hoped was convincing confusion. "Inconsistent how?" "The energy signatures we are tracking are too fresh. They indicate activity within the last hour, not yesterday as you claimed." "I don't know what to tell you," said, spreading his hands helplessly. "Maybe your equipment is more sensitive than I thought. I mean, I was using power tools to extract components. Could that explain what you're seeing?" The tracker appeared at the leader's shoulder, its sensors still active and scanning. "Detecting massive energy buildup throughout ship's power grid. Readings are unusual." Allowed himself a small smile. The feedback loop was working, creating a maze of false signals that would make tracking anything nearly impossible. "Yeah, these old battlecruisers can be tricky. Damaged power systems sometimes build up residual charges in weird ways. I've seen ships that were supposedly dead suddenly light up like festival displays." The leader was clearly becoming frustrated. "You will accompany us while we complete our search." "Is that really necessary?" asked. "I mean, I'm just a salvage operator. If there's a dangerous fugitive running around, wouldn't I be safer staying here?" "Move now." Sighed and got to his feet, making sure to grab his tool kit and scanner. As they moved deeper into the ship, he kept up a steady stream of nervous chatter, pointing out various hazards and unstable sections that might explain the odd sensor readings. "See that conduit there? Plasma feedback from the main gun arrays. Creates all sorts of electromagnetic interference. And those blast doors are powered by independent backup systems that sometimes activate randomly. I've seen salvage crews get trapped for days when those things malfunction." They weren't buying his explanations, but they were clearly having trouble making sense of their sensor data. The feedback loop had created was turning the entire ship into a maze of false positives and conflicting readings. As they passed near the maintenance shaft where was hidden, deliberately stumbled, dropping his scanner with a loud clatter. Sorry. These gravity plating irregularities are murder on the inner ear. Never can tell which way is up in these old wrecks." The distraction worked. While they were watching fumble around collecting his scattered tools, they missed the faint energy signature from the maintenance shaft, but caught a glimpse of movement in the shadows, just enough to confirm that was still alive and aware. They moved on, the search growing more frustrated as the ship's systems continued to generate false readings. kept up his role as helpful but nervous guide, pointing out hazards and offering explanations for every anomaly they encountered. But he could see the leader's patience wearing thin. Enough, the leader finally declared as they reached the ship's central hub. This vessel is compromised. Too much interference, too many variables. We withdraw and monitor from orbit. Felt a surge of relief, but tried not to let it show. Good call. These old ships can be death traps even when they're not haunted by mysterious energy readings. As they made their way back toward the exit, the tracker suddenly stopped, its sensors focused on something ahead. Wait! Detecting fresh life signs. Large humanoid, definitely alive, moving through Section 7. The leader whirled toward, weapon raised. You lied. I didn't lie about anything, protested, backing away with his hands raised. I told you everything I knew. But even as he spoke, realized what had happened. The feedback loop had worked too well, creating so much interference that had probably decided to make a run for it while the mercenaries were distracted. The alien was moving through the ship, trying to reach an escape route, and the sensors had finally managed to lock onto his real-life signs. Section 7, the leader barked into his comm. All units converge, target is mobile and attempting to escape. The ship erupted into activity as the remaining moved to intercept their quarry. Found himself roughly shoved aside as the mercenaries rushed past, their weapons powered up and ready for action. He could hear somewhere in the distance, moving with surprising speed despite his injuries. Made a split-second decision that would either save both their lives or get them both killed. He pulled out his scanner and quickly accessed the ship's remaining power systems, looking for anything he could use to even the odds. The old battlecruiser still had some surprises left in her. The ship's point defense turrets were offline, their targeting systems fried beyond repair. But the magnetic bottle containment for the ship's antimatter reserves was still partially functional, and if could trigger a controlled release. Come on, he muttered, his fingers flying over the scanner's interface. Come on, you beautiful old monster, one more fight left in you. The containment field fluctuated as fed it contradictory commands, building pressure that had nowhere to go. It wouldn't be enough to destroy the ship, but if he timed it right, it would create one hell of a distraction. Somewhere in the ship's depths, weapons fire erupted. The distinctive whine of plasma rifles mixed with deeper, more primal sounds that could only be coming from. The alien was fighting back, injured or not. Triggered the containment breach and threw himself behind the nearest bulkhead as energy cascaded through the ship's power grid. Emergency lighting failed throughout multiple sections, plunging half the ship into darkness. The artificial gravity fluctuated wildly, creating pockets of zero-G and areas where down suddenly became sideways. In the chaos that followed, heard the shouting in their native tongue, their coordination broken by the sudden system failures. But he also heard something else. The distinctive sound of an airlock cycling somewhere toward the ship's docking bay. Was making his escape. Waited until the immediate chaos died down before emerging from cover. The ship's emergency lighting was slowly coming back online, casting everything in an eerie red glow. He could hear the regrouping, their leader screaming orders about sealing all exits and establishing a perimeter. But knew it was too late. Was gone, disappeared into the vast maze of the scrapyard where even advanced sensors would have trouble tracking him. The alien warrior had escaped, and taken with him the knowledge that could expose the alliance between his people and the hegemony. The leader found sitting calmly on a piece of debris, apparently stunned by the sudden power failure. What happened? Shook his head slowly, still playing his role as confused salvage operator. Power surge, maybe? I warned you these old ships were unstable. The antimatter containment systems on these battle cruisers were never designed to handle the kind of damage this thing took. The leader's weapon was still trained on, suspicion clear in its posture. The target has escaped. Target looked genuinely confused. You mean there really was someone else in here, a warrior, and I missed him? He shook his head in amazement. My grandmother always said I couldn't find trouble if it was painted bright red and singing opera. They spent another hour searching the ship, but found only empty corridors and the lingering traces of passage. Eventually, they gave up and prepared to leave. Their mission failed and their quarry escaped. Human, the leader said as they reached the exit. If you encounter this fugitive again, you will report it immediately. Absolutely, agreed readily. I'm not paid enough to deal with dangerous alien warriors. That's what you professional types are for. They filed out of the ship, their searchlights disappearing into the maze of wreckage. Waited until their ships had departed before allowing himself to slump with relief. The plan had worked barely, but was free, and the mercenaries had nothing to show for their efforts. Made his way back through the ship, checking for any signs that the alien had left behind. In the maintenance shaft where it had hidden, he found a small piece of armor deliberately left behind like a calling card. Scratched into the metal was a symbol didn't recognize, but the meaning was clear enough. It was a token of thanks, acknowledgement of the debt between them. As prepared to leave the derelict ship, his scanner picked up one final energy signature. Deep in the ship's data banks, someone had left an encrypted message file, tagged with his name and a simple text message. The hunt continues. Honor remains. Smiled as he downloaded the file. Had survived, and somewhere out there in the vast galaxy, the fight against the Hegemony Alliance would continue. It wasn't much, but sometimes the smallest actions could have the biggest consequences. Walking back through the scrapyard toward his own modest salvage ship, reflected on the day's events. He had come looking for valuable components and found something far more precious. He had found proof that honor and courage existed even in the darkest corners of the galaxy, and that sometimes the most unlikely alliances could make all the difference. The twin suns were setting over the scrapyard, casting long shadows between the piles of broken dreams and discarded hopes, but walked with purpose now, the data crystal from secure in his pocket and a new mission burning in his heart. The galaxy was about to learn that humans could be far more dangerous than anyone imagined, especially when they decided to stop fixing broken machines and start breaking the systems that needed to be destroyed. The hunt was far from over, it was just getting started. 3 months after his encounter with, stood in the cargo bay of his salvage ship, staring at the most unlikely collection of beings he had ever assembled. The encrypted message from the warrior had led him on a journey across half the galaxy, following a trail of coded transmissions and secret contacts that revealed the scope of the resistance movement against the Hegemony Alliance. There was a human engineer from the Titan colonies whose entire family had been killed in a Hegemony raid. Her dark eyes held the kind of cold fury that came from loss too great to forgive. Beside her stood a scientist whose research into quantum communications had made her a target for Hegemony forces seeking to control faster-than-light information networks. In the corner, seemingly relaxed but actually coiled for action, sat a who had deserted from a mercenary company when he learned they were working for the Hegemony. His own people considered him a traitor, but he had information about Hegemony military tactics that could prove invaluable. And floating in a specialized atmosphere tank was Chorus, a member of the gas giant dwelling symphonic collective, whose people's unique ability to process massive amounts of data had made them slaves in Hegemony computational centers. They were misfits and outcasts, rebels and refugees, brought together by a shared enemy and a desperate hope that maybe, just maybe, they could make a difference. Had used the information from data crystal to find them, one by one, building a network of resistance that spanned multiple star systems. But the real prize was the ship they were currently approaching through the asteroid field of the 439 system. The vessel was enormous, easily a kilometer long, its hull by countless battles but still radiating the deadly grace of a predator. It was a dreadnought, one of the few remaining ships loyal to the old ways, and it carried the most dangerous cargo in the galaxy. Himself, recovered from his injuries and leading a growing coalition of species opposed to the Hegemony expansion. "Still can't believe we're doing this," muttered, checking her sidearm for the 3rd time. "Flying straight into a ship full of warriors. My ancestors would have locked me up for insanity." "Your ancestors never met," replied, making final adjustments to the ship's docking systems. "Trust me, once you get past the whole apex predator thing, he's actually pretty reasonable." Looked up from his equipment checks. Reasonable for a maybe, but remember, human, his people have been warriors for. Even the rebels among them think primarily in terms of strength and honor. Show weakness and they will lose respect for this entire alliance. "I'm not planning to show weakness," said quietly. "But I'm not planning to pretend to be something I'm not either. We're humans. We survive by being adaptable, innovative, and occasionally completely insane. Might as well play to our strengths." The docking bay of the ship was a cathedral of metal and shadow. its vaulted ceiling disappearing into darkness above their heads. Atmospheric force fields shimmered at the bay's entrance, holding in air and heat while allowing ships to pass through. As salvage vessels settled onto the deck with a slight tremor, he could see warriors emerging from alcoves in the walls, their forms moving with predatory grace despite their massive size. "Remember," said to his companions as they prepared to disembark, "we're not here as supplicants or hired help. We're here as equal partners in this alliance. Act like it." The airlock cycled open and stepped out first, his companions closed behind. The warriors watched them with glowing eyes, their forearms hanging loose but ready for action. For a moment, the cargo bay was silent except for the hum of life support systems and the distant vibration of the ship's engines. Then emerged from the shadows at the far end of the bay and felt his breath catch. The alien warrior had recovered completely from his injuries, his midnight blue skin unmarked by scars, his forearms moving with fluid coordination. But more than that, he radiated an aura of command that made it clear he was no longer just a survivor hiding in a scrap yard. This was Hunter Prime, leader of the Resistance, and every being in the bay could feel his presence. "James," said, his deep voice carrying easily across the bay, "you have traveled far from the scrap yards of 442B. "Distance is relative," replied with a grin. "Besides, I had some really interesting reading material for the trip." He pulled out the data crystal that had given him months ago. "Your intelligence on the Hegemony Alliance was quite enlightening." Approached slowly, his burning eyes fixed on space. "And what did you think of what you learned, human?" "I thought it was the kind of problem that needed a really good engineer to solve," said. "Lucky for you, I happen to know a few." The warriors around the bay made sounds that might have been laughter or might have been growls. It was hard to tell with their species, but its expression was unmistakably amused. "You have not changed, still making jokes in the face of impossible odds." "It's a gift," said. Then his expression grew serious. "But I didn't come here just to exchange pleasantries. The information you gave me led us to some disturbing discoveries. The hegemony isn't just planning to expand into human and territory. They're planning something much bigger." Gestured for them to follow him deeper into the ship. The corridors were sized for beings much larger than humans, forcing and his companions to hurry to keep up with this longer stride. The walls were decorated with what looked like battle honors and family crests, telling the story of a warrior culture that stretched back. They entered a conference room where several other beings were waiting. Recognized some of them from intelligence reports, resistance leaders from a dozen different species, all united by their opposition to hegemony expansion. At the center of the group sat an elderly whose scars told the story of a lifetime of battle, and whose bearing suggested he outranked even. "War Leader Orr," said formally, "I present and his companions, representatives of the human resistance movement." The elderly studied with eyes like molten gold, weighing and measuring. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of absolute command. "So, the humans who saved the life of Hunter Prime. Tell me, small ones, what makes you think your species has anything to offer in a war against the greatest military power in the galaxy?" Felt the attention of every being in the room focus on him. This was the moment that would determine whether humans would be accepted as equal partners in the resistance or dismissed as irrelevant. He took a breath and stepped forward. "With respect, War Leader, I think you're asking the wrong question. It's not what we can offer in a war against the hegemony. It's what we can offer in winning that war." Orr's expression might have been a smile, though with facial features it was hard to tell. "Explain." "The hegemony is built on a simple premise," said, his voice growing stronger as he warmed to his subject. "Overwhelming force applied to strategically important targets. They win by being bigger, stronger, and better equipped than their enemies. It's worked for them for centuries because they've always fought enemies who tried to match them strength for strength. And humans would fight differently." "Humans don't fight fair," said, speaking up for the first time. "We fight smart, we fight dirty, and we fight in ways that make our enemies wish they'd never heard of us." Stepped forward, her crystalline skin refracting the room's lighting into rainbow patterns. "The hegemony relies on centralized command structures and predictable tactical responses. Human military theory emphasizes asymmetric warfare, unpredictable tactics, and the exploitation of enemy weaknesses rather than confrontation with enemy strengths." The former mercenary nodded agreement. "I have fought alongside humans in border conflicts. They do not fight like any other species. They adapt, they improvise, and they never give up even when victory seems impossible. Chorus, speaking through the translation device attached to its atmospheric tank, added its own perspective. The symphonic collective has analyzed human historical data. Your species has a unique talent for turning disasters into victories through creative problem-solving and sheer stubborn persistence. War leader or listened to each speaker in turn, his expression unreadable. Finally, he turned back to, "You speak of fighting smart and fighting dirty. Give me specifics. How would humans wage war against the hegemony?" Smiled, and there was something in that expression that made several of the warriors in the room take notice. "We wouldn't fight their war, war leader. We'd make them fight ours." For the next hour, and his companions outlined their vision for the resistance. Instead of massive fleet engagements that the hegemony would inevitably win, they proposed a campaign of sabotage, guerrilla warfare, and technological disruption. Human engineers would create new weapons and defensive systems using improvised materials and unconventional designs. Resistance cells would strike at supply lines, communication networks, and infrastructure, forcing the hegemony to spread their forces thin, trying to protect everything at once. "The key," explained, "is to make the cost of expansion higher than the benefits. The hegemony can afford to lose a few battles, but they can't afford to waste resources indefinitely. If we can make every system they occupy a constant drain on their military and economic resources, eventually they'll have to choose between expansion and stability." Had been silent throughout the presentation, but now he leaned forward. "This strategy requires a level of coordination between species that has never been achieved before. The resistance groups have been operating independently, with minimal communication and no central command. Which is why it hasn't been working," said bluntly. "The hegemony beats isolated resistance groups one at a time, but if we can create a unified command structure, share intelligence and resources, coordinate our attacks, suddenly we're not just random terrorist cells, we're a real threat." War leader or was quiet for a long moment, clearly considering the implications. Finally, he spoke. "What you propose is not without merit, but it requires trust between species who have been enemies for generations. They have fought for control of the Rim territories. They have raided human colonies for slaves and resources. The symphonic collective has maintained neutrality in all conflicts, trading with whoever offered the best terms. Why should any of us trust the others?" "Because the alternative is extinction," said quietly. "The hegemony doesn't just conquer territories. They eliminate entire cultures, entire ways of life. They turn proud species into slave labor and resource extraction units. If we don't work together, we're all going to die separately." The room fell silent as her words sank in. Everyone present had lost something to the hegemony, whether it was family or freedom itself. The choice was stark: unite or be destroyed. Stood slowly, his massive frame dominating the conference room. "I have seen what humans are capable of. They saved my life when they had nothing to gain from it, and they have kept their word in every agreement we have made since. If Hunter Prime vouches for this alliance, will the other clans listen?" "Some will," Or admitted. "Others will require more convincing. The old prejudices run deep, and many still see humans as weak primitives barely worthy of notice." "Then we'll have to change their minds," said with a grin. "Good thing humans are really, really good at proving people wrong." Over the next several days, the unlikely alliance hammered out the details of their resistance network. Communications protocols were established, using quantum entanglement transmitters that designed to be undetectable by hegemony sensors. Strike teams were organized with mixed-species crews, combining warriors, human engineers, scientists, and specialists from dozens of other races. Found himself appointed as one of the coalition's strategic coordinators, responsible for planning operations that would maximize damage to the hegemony while minimizing risk to civilian populations. It was a job he had never asked for, but one that seemed to fit his unique combination of technical knowledge and creative problem-solving. The first major operation came 3 weeks later, when intelligence reports indicated that a hegemony supply convoy would be passing through the system. The convoy was heavily guarded, with escort vessels that could easily destroy any conventional attack force, but had a different kind of attack in mind. "We're not going to fight their ships," he explained to the mixed-species strike team assembled in the Dreadnought's briefing room. "We're going to turn their ships against each other." The plan was audacious even by human standards. Using salvaged components and quantum communication technology, had built a device that could infiltrate the convoy's command network and feed false information to their targeting systems. If everything went according to plan, the hegemony escorts would identify each other as enemy vessels and destroy the entire convoy without the resistance firing a single shot. "And if the plan fails?" asked the warrior assigned to lead the boarding party that would plant the device. "Then we run like hell and try to think of something else," admitted. "But it's going to work. I have a good feeling about this." The attack went perfectly. The resistance ships approached the convoy using captured hegemony identification codes, close enough to deploy the infiltration device before withdrawing to a safe distance. For 10 minutes, nothing happened. Then the escort vessels suddenly opened fire on each other, their AI systems convinced that they were under attack by enemy forces. The battle was brief and devastating. When the smoke cleared, the entire convoy had been destroyed, including supply ships carrying enough weapons and equipment to outfit a planetary invasion force. The resistance had struck a significant blow against the hegemony without losing a single ship or warrior. More importantly, they had proven that the alliance could work. The successful operation led to a flood of new recruits as resistance cells throughout the galaxy realized that victory against the hegemony might actually be possible. Over the following months, the pattern repeated itself throughout hegemony space. Supply lines were disrupted, communication networks were compromised, and entire star systems became too costly to maintain. The hegemony found themselves fighting an enemy they couldn't pin down, couldn't predict, and couldn't defeat through conventional means, but knew that their success came with a price. The hegemony was beginning to adapt, developing new security protocols and deploying increasingly sophisticated countermeasures. The easy victories were over, and the real war was about to begin. Standing on the observation deck of the dreadnought, watching the stars wheel slowly past, reflected on the journey that had brought him here. 6 months ago, he had been a simple salvage operator, pulling scrap from dead ships in a forgotten corner of the galaxy. Now he was helping to coordinate a rebellion that spanned dozens of star systems and hundreds of species. "Regrets," his deep voice came from behind him. Turned to find the warrior approaching, moving with the silent grace that was so characteristic of his people. "About leaving the salvage business? Not really, though I have to admit the retirement plan was probably better." "You could return to that life if you chose," said. "The resistance can function without you now. You have given us the tools we need to continue the fight." Shook his head. "Can't do that. I started this job and I'm going to see it through to the end. Besides, someone needs to keep you warrior types from doing anything too heroically stupid." Made the sound that had learned to interpret as laughter. "And someone needs to keep you humans from improvising yourselves into extinction. Your species has a dangerous tendency towards self-sacrifice in the name of victory." "That's what makes us effective," said with a grin. "We're just crazy enough to try things that no sane species would attempt." "Indeed, which is why this alliance will succeed where others have failed. The hegemony understands honor, they understand fear, and they understand greed. But they do not understand humans, and that will be their downfall." As if summoned by their conversation, an alert klaxon sounded throughout the ship. Emergency lights bathed the observation deck in red as the dreadnought's crew responded to whatever threat had been detected, and exchanged glances and headed for the bridge at a run. The main display showed a massive hegemony fleet emerging from hyperspace, dozens of ships including several of the dreaded Dominator-class battleships that were the backbone of their military might. They had found the Resistance fleet, and they had come in force. "How many?" War Leader or demanded from his command throne. 47 vessels confirmed," the sensor operator reported. "Multiple heavy cruisers, escort frigates, and at least 6 Dominators. They are deploying in standard assault formation." The Resistance fleet was outnumbered 3-1, and by an even larger margin. A conventional battle would be a massacre, exactly the kind of fight that had warned against from the beginning. But as he looked around the bridge at the faces of his allies, human and alien alike, felt a familiar sensation. It was the same feeling he got when confronted with a particularly challenging piece of broken machinery, the moment when all the pieces suddenly clicked into place, and he could see exactly what needed to be done. "War Leader," said, stepping forward, "I need you to trust me, and I need you to do exactly what I'm about to tell you, no matter how insane it sounds. Or looked at him with those burning golden eyes. Speak, human. Smiled, and it was the kind of smile that had made hegemony admirals wake up in cold sweats, ever since the resistance began its campaign of impossible victories. We're going to surrender, he said, and then we're going to show them exactly why picking a fight with humans was the biggest mistake they ever made. The bridge erupted in shocked protests from several species, but stepped forward, his massive form lending weight to his words. I have learned to trust human tactical intuition, he said simply. If says we surrender, then we surrender, and may the gods have mercy on our enemies because we will not. The final battle was about to begin, and the galaxy would never be the same.